One reaction with Levy, and it is finally here. Game week, week 12, rivalry week across college football. Matthew Levy, Oliver Schaack, back with you. And Oliver, this is a week that is defined, I believe, by one game. I'm going to put bias aside for you. Is this week defined by Michigan, Ohio State?
Since the beginning of time, this week has been defined by the game. I don't care what else is going on in college football. My eyes will be glued to Ann Arbor this week. I'm so excited. Big Noon's going to be there again, which is great. And it's two of the three best teams in the country. I mean, it's cinema. It's pure cinema. I can't wait.
Yeah, and it will be. I'll be there live at the game as a Michigan student flying back up Friday. So we'll hit on Michigan, Ohio State in just a minute. We'll get to all the preview. We'll talk about it for a long time. But I want to start, of course, it's Wednesday. We had rankings yesterday, and everything that stayed the same in the top eight except one. Washington over Florida State. So it is now one Georgia, two Ohio State, three Michigan. Those two will be sorted out. But the big change is now Washington over Florida State, and five is Florida State. Any reaction to that ranking move?
I think a lot of people are going to say it's unfair because they're going to assume the committee moved them down, Florida State being them because of Jordan Travis, which, by the way, I mean, god awful. I felt when that happened, you knew immediately when you saw his leg, he was done. But if you look at it as far as which win is more impressive, call me crazy, but on the road at Oregon State is more impressive than at home against North Alabama. Okay. Even if Jordan Travis is there, it's just not the same. Washington had their biggest win of the year. I think we can all agree on, biggest road win for sure. And it was not because of Michael Penix, which was the biggest takeaway for me, at least. Not that he was horrible or anything, but he wasn't the number one reason they won. So I agree with it personally. I think right now the rankings are about as accurate as you can be. 2 and 3 are the only ones that can be interchangeable, and that's going to get figured out in just a few short days. So I think the committee nailed it.
Yeah, I do. I think so too. Maybe I would have moved, at the bottom there. Just the way Texas has taken care of business.
Mm-hmm.
There is an argument between Texas and Oregon. They haven't touched it, so I'm not going to get into that. But I do think this Washington team proved a lot in Corvallis. They, Jalen McMillan comes back, he had 4 catches, 60 yards. Nothing huge, but he made a difference, I thought. And with those receiving core, but they were on the road in rain against a really good defense, a really good run game, and they won ugly. Like, is that the team I've compared Washington to, and we've talked about this, was those OU teams with Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield.
Yeah.
Were those teams winning on the road against Oregon State? I don't know.
I mean, first of all, I don't think those teams in those days with, Baker or Kyler Murray or whoever it was had a defensive performance like this. No. Because to me, that was the story. Jabbar Muhammad moved up about 3 rounds in everyone's mock drafts because he had about the best game of his career. Braylon Trice, who I've been big on Braylon Trice forever. Not only did he have six tackles and a sack, as you noted, but 2.5 tackles for loss on his own. Washington as a team had 7 tackles for loss. Okay. And that's because they applied pressure on DJ Uiagalelei. And you saw it in his stats. DJ was 15 of 31, had 2 picks. He was only really able to get things going with his legs because he had a few big runs on 4th down. And for Washington to shut him down, really, they shut down the passing game. That was the most impressive win of the year to me. And on top of that, dude, Rome Odunze is so good. He was literally having just fun with the Oregon State secondary. I thought he looked fantastic. But for Oregon State, Damian Martinez, he's so real. I mean, that dude in the backfield is unbelievable. But for Washington, this was such a huge win. And I think for guys like you who questioned whether they could play with Oregon, because I think the question was, okay, what if Penix has an off day? Like, what happens then? If they can do that, I mean, that shows that they can compete with Oregon, in my opinion.
I completely agree, and I know they already beat them, but that was in Washington, and those concerns were just kept rising because they were in these 1-score games. They haven't won by more than 10 points since the middle of October. It's a crazy stat, but they continue to win ugly, and now you're starting to see the completeness of this team. You can lean on. They have a closer in Penix who knows, all right, we're going to attack that one-on-one matchup like they did at the end of the game. So they can win with the pass. They have shown that they can win with the run. And now this week they showed, okay, we can play defense. So in the last 3 weeks, they've showed pass, run, and defense. Two of those 3 things I had a lot of questions about. So you got to give credit where it's due. They played an excellent game. Their defense in the second half, listen to this stat. 0 points in the fourth quarter versus USC. They had 14 in the third. 0 points versus Utah, and then 10 points against Oregon State.
Yeah.
Oklahoma's defense was not doing that.
Not doing that.
Back in those
By
days.
the way, look at the quarterbacks they did that against. Caleb Williams, DJ for Oregon State, and Bryson Barnes, who was hot in the second half of the season for Utah. Those are legitimate Pac-12 quarterbacks. Like, they were doing that to legitimate quarterbacks. So those are impressive stats, especially Caleb Williams at USC.
Does this game, and this is my thinking, my takeaway as well, does this game make you believe that the Pac-12 is guaranteed to be in the playoff?
Yes, because if you look at how it's set up with the college football rankings, pretty much whoever wins the Pac-12 is getting in. Because I think at this point, now that Washington has jumped Florida State in the rankings, and presumably so, I mean, even if Florida State wins out, that's their only hope to make the college football playoff, because if Washington wins out, they're getting in. But with a backup quarterback against Louisville, that's not really a guarantee anymore. Louisville's a very good football team. And
they still have to play Florida. They still have to play Florida.
On the road, in Gainesville.
Prime time.
That is a rivalry game. That's not even a guarantee. I guarantee you Gainesville wants to screw up their college football playoff hopes. So I really do believe that the winner of Oregon-Washington in the Pac-12 championship, they're going to get in and be that 4 seed. But who knows? Like, they could even be higher, right? Because if Alabama beats Georgia in the SEC title game, who's to say that 2 teams who have won their conference shouldn't get in over a Georgia who didn't win their conference with the same record? And then you also have Texas who could win out, and they could have the same record as Georgia. So all hell's going to break loose in about 2 weeks, and it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, you love that, especially since your team's not really in it. So,
yours shouldn't. They should be banned, but it's fine. It's cool. It's cool. It's cool.
But we'll get into Michigan, Maryland later. But I think the last point on this is that the one scenario where the Pac-12 gets left out is if Washington wins, they beat Washington State this week, Oregon loses, and then Arizona would get in and they win out. But they would have 3 losses and they would win the Pac-12 championship. Then the Pac-12 would get left out. But the chances of that happening, Oregon losing to Oregon State, and we'll get to that prediction later, I just don't think it's very high. I feel like it's going to be Oregon-Washington, winner goes to the playoff. I think that's a de facto playoff game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's very unlikely that Arizona can come in. By the way, I mean, you were so right about Arizona. They are so real.
Real.
if that quarterback started out the year as a starting quarterback,
it's great.
If he started out the year, they're probably 2 losses at most, maybe even 1. Like, they could possibly be like in the Pac-12 championship game as of right now. Because remember when they played Washington earlier in the year?
That's what I was just about to say. They've won. Washington has now won on the road against 2 top 16 teams right now in the country. There's not a lot of teams that can say that.
That's true. And they played well. Like, they got it done when they didn't play their best. That's the big takeaway. So
I think so. The sentiment is you can't fault Florida State for losing its quarterback, but this was more about, okay, Washington has really taken that leap and showed themselves, because a lot of people, including me, thought they were going to lose.
Yeah, no, I mean, resume versus resume, even if Travis never gets hurt, it's better than Florida State. It just is. Yes. So there's no debate to me about when it comes to that.
All right. I think we both agree. Let's move on to this Florida State team. They go on the road at Florida. It is a battle of backup QBs. Graham Mertz of Florida, he went down, I think, with a collarbone injury. So he's out for the year. And then Florida State, we all know about the Jordan Travis injury. So sad to see. So it's Tate Roadmaker, who against North Alabama,
yep.
Okay. North Alabama, again, why are they playing them in the second last game of the season when Michigan has to go on the road against Maryland? We'll get to that later. 217 yards, 2 touchdowns in that game. Over his career, he's thrown 767 yards, 7 touchdowns, 5 picks. He has experience. He is now going on the road, a completely different environment, but he gets to face a backup QB. Any thoughts about this game that stick out to you?
Florida State's running back room better be ready to go, because they're not going to rely on a backup quarterback. Like, he may have a great game, but I guarantee you that running game for Florida State, they're going to have to be on their A game, because also you're playing at Florida. That is one of the hardest places to play in the country, even though they're, I believe, 5-6 or 6-5, something to that effect. They just lost a close one to Missouri, which was a great game. This is a rivalry game. no matter what your record is, these are the games you circle. And I think Florida, they also have a great running game in their own right? With Etienne's younger brother, Trevor Etienne, he's real. Montreal Johnson Jr., he's real. I mean, they killed Tennessee earlier in the year in the running game, right? So it's going to be interesting to see. I'm very worried about Florida State because the strength of their offense is their passing game with the wide receiver trio that they have, and Keon Coleman, who's going to be top 15 pick probably in the NFL draft at wide receiver. So if they can't get that going, they got to make sure the running game is there. If the running game is not there, I would not be shocked if Florida takes this. I really wouldn't.
This is going to be about who runs the ball more effectively.
Yeah.
And this Florida running game is real. And Florida, a lot of people lost like hope in them once they went down. And it feels like in this game, you could say, even though they're playing with a backup quarterback, after the loss last week against Missouri, is Billy Napier coaching for his job? Because if that's up for grabs here, they are going to come out with their pants on fire. They are.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, we talked about it in the beginning of the year when they lost to Utah and they got handled by Utah. I was the first one to say Napier's on the hot seat because it just felt like there was no momentum. It didn't really feel like anything was going in the right way for Napier or this Florida offense. But then you saw Graham Mertz develop, and he looked better this year at Florida than any of the previous years at Wisconsin, and it really wasn't even close. So that's what held on for Napier and that big win against Tennessee, of course. But if they can't beat a backup quarterback, and granted, Florida State has some great offensive pieces, they have some great defensive pieces. If you cannot beat a backup quarterback, however, at home in Gainesville, those are the games you got to win. And they can't even keep it close. I would not be shocked if Napier's on his way out. This cannot be a blowout win for Florida State, or otherwise Napier's gone.
Yeah, this is not okay. This is just Florida trying to ruin their hopes, their playoff hopes. It is okay. We need a win because our coach is on the hot seat, and that's a different feeling for a team. I wonder how that affects this game. There's so many unknowns. I thought coming into this conversation, I was going to take Florida State by 10. I thought the Gators' pass defense is atrocious, but I just worry about on the road those cadences, dealing with that crowd. Is Roadmaker going to be ready? I don't know. I don't know.
It's really hard. I think they're going to, I mean, first of all, the under looks pretty damn good if you're looking at this game. Really good. But yeah, if Roadmaker, if he can't make throws, I mean, his weapons are too good. Like if you can't get them going to some degree, even if it's just checkdowns or whatever the case might be, you got to win the time of possession battle if you're Florida State with Roadmaker. You can't let Florida get their running game going. If they're not able to do that, then Florida has a real chance.
Can I throw you a scenario?
Yes, please do.
Yes. Florida State wins out, but they win, ugly. And you can see the effect of not having Jordan Travis on the field. They look considerably worse. Would the committee, let's say if Alabama were to beat Georgia by 3 in a heavy-hitting all-star game, would they put in a one-loss Georgia over Florida State undefeated? Because I think they would.
If they did, it's a disservice to college football. Because
really? No, I disagree.
Okay, here's the thing. You're saying Georgia, right? You're not saying Alabama. You're saying Georgia.
Well, I would assume Alabama's in.
Well, they'd be in. Yes, I just want to make sure. I want to make sure you were talking about Georgia. Then what the hell's the point of conference championships? What's the point? Like, why even play the game? And I understand, like, if it's heavy hitting, I just think, like, your argument with Texas last week when you said, I don't understand why they wouldn't put Texas in. Why can't we have that same argument for Florida State? By the way, Florida State would be undefeated. So to me, I understand the argument of the eye test and who are the true 4 best teams, which is why 4 teams in a playoff with, 356 teams makes 0 sense. Thank God they're fixing that next year. But you got to respect the fact that Florida State, by the way, if they beat Louisville with a backup quarterback, you got to respect them, right?
Yeah,
if they go undefeated, I do believe that there's something to be said about winning a conference championship. And I think every team should be held to that same standard. If Florida State has a better record and they win their conference championship, even though Georgia's so good, if they don't win their conference championship and they have a worse record, to me, there's not really an argument.
Interesting. Yeah, I just think, look, if Florida State looks like a completely different team and they haven't been that dominant to begin with, there is a considerable fall off. If Alabama, Georgia feels like the game that I think it's going to be and Alabama edges them out, there's an argument to, or even if, let's say it's not Georgia. Let's say Georgia went one lost Texas. Is that an argument?
See, you have a better loss with you, or excuse me, better argument with that with one loss Texas because they
because
win
they
their
had the
conference.
conference championship.
I was just about to say, like, if Oregon wins and they have one loss and they win the Pac-12, better argument to be made. Because at the end of the day, they won out after losing to Washington earlier in the year, and then they beat them again. I think you can make the argument that Oregon should be in over Florida State. Same thing with Texas. They had a harder schedule. They played in the Big 12, which is better than the ACC. You can have that argument because at that point, how much does going undefeated in the ACC with really what one or two other, like the ACC is not that good compared to the Big 12 or the Pac 12. But with Georgia, if you don't win your conference and you have a worse record, it is very hard for me to respectively say, yeah, you should still put them in.
That's fair. Look, I think it will be. I just think it's a lot of unknowns and we don't know. But
Yeah.
I think that scenario, especially with Oregon and Texas, is very real, and undefeated Florida State not getting in to the college football playoff. All right, one more game before we get to the big one. We'll break down Michigan, Maryland before that. Oregon State. To me, I look at this game and I look directly at the spread and I say, okay, Vegas knows what's happening here. They're favored. Oregon is favored at home in a rivalry game by 2 touchdowns. Is that ridiculous?
Autzen Stadium's different, dude. Like that, I'm telling. Like the first thing that I thought when I saw this game and I was looking over it, and based on how they've been playing, I was so sad that this game was not in Corvallis. I really was, because it's so hard to win at Oregon, dude. It is so unbelievably hard. 14 points. I think what they're saying is, look, you neutralized Washington's offense and you still couldn't get it done. That to me is what they're saying, because they're saying if you couldn't do that to Washington at home, if you neutralized Michael Penix and you still couldn't take advantage of that, you held Washington to 22 points. How are you supposed to do the same thing on the road at Oregon? Because you can make the argument that Oregon's offense has been one of the hottest offenses in the country in the second half of the season, right? So how are you going to be able to do that same thing on the road at Oregon when you did it home against Washington with Michael Penix, who I finished with less than 200 yards passing, and you still couldn't get the job done? So they're really taking into account what happened last week against Washington and saying, yeah, I don't know how you can do that on the road with Oregon and Bo Nix, who just had 6 touchdowns in the first half against Arizona State. I mean, that was just unbelievable. So
Unbelievable.
So I understand the line. I do understand the line. Also, you're facing a better rushing attack. I love Dylan Johnson, but Bucky Irving to me is the better running back, and the Oregon running game is just better. So I'm not really that shocked because they're really taking into account what recently happened.
That's fair. So the thing is, there's an emotional letdown factor for Oregon State. They're coming off this home game, prime time, ABC, and now they have to go on the road. Short week. It's a short week because the game's on Friday night. There's an emotional letdown factor that is there. And Oregon, they've been dominant. Dominant. They haven't been in a 1-score game since Washington. And then before that, in week 2. So they have ran through their schedule. We saw them against Utah. Bo Nix's stats this season: 3,500, over 3,500 yards, 35 touchdowns, 2 picks.
He's unreal.
This is his Heisman moment in a standalone game. They have to win this game to get to the Pac-12 championship. So there's no overlooking this game for Oregon. This feels, and this line is telling you that this could be a 3-touchdown Oregon win.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be shocked either because of how good Oregon's offense is. They have a legit defense too. It's not as if it's a one-sided team, right? I mean, they can win in all 3 phases of the game. Also, what's going to be interesting to me, if Oregon State can keep this close, Jonathan Smith's stock when it comes to all the vacancies in head coaching going into the offseason is only going to keep getting higher. So this is a really big game for Jonathan Smith because with conference realignment, I just don't see how he stays at Oregon State. And he's obviously been linked to UCLA, but I mean, hell, like Texas A&M, like why wouldn't they give him a call? Or we just said, if Napier's out at Florida, another SEC school, why wouldn't they give him a call? So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how Oregon State plays, because if they keep it close, Jonathan Smith's stock will go through the roof.
That is completely correct, because this is such a tough spot for a team.
Mm-hmm.
Again, emotional week, on the road, short week. There's a lot here going against Oregon State, and a lot telling you that, again, it's going to be Oregon by multiple touchdowns, they believe. So if Oregon State can keep it close within 1 score, they run the ball. Damian Martinez, DJ plays pretty well. Like it wasn't like Oregon State was boat raced against Washington. They were right in that game, and a couple of bounces. They held Michael Penix to 0 points. Granted, Oregon's at home with a better offense, 2nd total offense compared to 8th for Washington. So those 2 things, if Oregon State can kind of stymie this offense, no one has done it. And if they were to do it and they're in a one-score game late, even if they lose Jonathan Smith, I agree. I think he would get a call. I think A&M would seriously look at him.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, look, A&M's A&M. They're gonna call Dan Lanning. They're gonna call Nick Saban. They're gonna call everyone. But a realistic shot at Jonathan Smith goes up if he can somehow keep this game close. Also, Oregon State's not playing for anything. They're 8-3. They're not gonna be in the Pac-12 title game. They're gonna
Yeah,
have
they
some.
have no chance.
They literally
They're
have
eliminated.
nothing. For a team that's in the top 25, they don't really have much to play for. Like pride also out the window, right? Because this is, I mean, if you win against Oregon, that's huge. But at the end of the day, with how good this team was, 8-3 in a best or 3-loss season, best case scenario would still be a disappointment. So if he can get his team fired up and keep it close with Oregon, I think Jonathan Smith is going to get a lot more phone calls.
Well, I think there's also the element of getting to the New Year's Six bowl game. I think if they were to win this game, they're back in the top 12 and in the New Year's Six, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah,
And that's number one. And number two, this is the rivalry. This could be the last rivalry game between Oregon and Oregon State. I know they're in talks to resume it, but this could be the last game, depending on what happens with the potential home and home. So is there extra motivation? Hey, Oregon's leaving the Pac-12, just like we saw in Bedlam. I feel like that could be another factor for Oregon State to kind of wake up.
yeah. I hope so. And this is also a great rivalry. Like the Civil War is a great rivalry to have. Like the Apple Cup with Washington State. Like Pac-12 rivalries are real. So I pray that this isn't the last. They are. Come on. I pray to God this isn't the last time we see them. Go ask their fan bases how real these like they hate each other. Okay, like I hope to see these continue, man, because Pac-12 rivalries are great. It's so sad it goes out this way, man. Like it's such a good conference to have this be the finale. We're never going to see the Pac-12 ever again. It sucks, but hopefully they keep the rivalries because it's too good to not have.
Speaking of a team that I was just thinking about this, and I didn't include this on our notes. Alabama this
Hmm.
week, they're already into the SEC championship. I know it's Nick Saban, but is there any chance of a letdown at Auburn? The spread's the same at 14.
There always is. There always is. And you know what I mean? Like rivalry week, crazier things have happened, right? I mean, I believe it's the 10-year anniversary of the kick six. And we saw that unfold. I believe it is the 10-year anniversary, which is crazy.
Okay.
Yeah, 10 years ago. Chris Davis takes it to the house on the field goal, which is, I mean, I remember where I was exactly when that moment happened. To me, that's the best regular season game I've ever seen in college football. I don't think there's even a debate.
I think so too.
Right? Like maybe 2019 Bama LSU is like right behind it. You know, the Joe Burrow versus Tua in Tuscaloosa, but still,
amazing.
that was stupid. I just saw the highlights of it with some of my boys the other day. That game was stupid. But anytime you play a rivalry game, anything can happen. And plus, Auburn is shown to be like a tough place to play this year. Remember what happened with Georgia in like earlier in the year?
7-point game.
If Brock Bowers is injured in that game, as he was for the majority of the season, they may not win that game, right? I mean, it was the Brock Bowers show when he had the game-winning touchdown. So who knows? Like you never know. But I will say Alabama, they're one of the one or two hottest teams in the country right now. So like they are playing up there with the best of the best. So we'll see. But I think Alabama will win. Like I wouldn't be shocked if they cover either, but you never know in the Sugar Bowl, man.
You just can't go against Saban. At this point in the year, he knows what buttons to press.
You can never go, or not Sugar Bowl, Iron Bowl, but you know what I mean? It's just, who knows? I mean, I don't think Nick Saban's ever been more motivated either, because I think people just counted him out after the loss to Texas, and they've just been dismantling teams. They're just embarrassing teams. So I can't wait. I think it'll be great.
You link Belichick to Saban. It's Belichick's going like this. Saban is just steady, now going up, one loss. I mean, it's just awesome to see because those two have been linked forever.
Don't doubt St. Nick. Never doubt St. Nick.
Don't doubt him. All right, before we get into the big game, and we'll spend a lot of time on it, Michigan, Maryland. I was there. Michigan got out to this lead. They kind of got complacent. They lost their two tackles. They lost their number one wide receiver. Maryland really woke up, I think, starting in that last shot of the first half, where they got that first touchdown. They woke up. They gave them a fight. There was a questionable intentional grounding call. And Michigan ultimately, behind Mike Sanderstill's 2 picks, behind their defensive line, eventually won the game. Are you encouraged as a Maryland fan?
It's so hard to keep defending Talia. It's so freaking hard. If he played to his potential, if he played as good as I've seen him play before, first of all, I'm of the belief that was not a questionable call with intentional. Like it was intentional grounding. It was. And like
I didn't know. I didn't know if you thought that.
a lot of Maryland people are disagreeing with that. It was intentional grounding. Second of all, he is a 4-year starter in this system. You're throwing off your back foot when pressure comes. You can't throw off your back foot where no one is and then get mad when there's an intentional grounding call. He just looked flustered throughout that entire game. And it was so frustrating because personally to me, the line of scrimmage battle, Maryland held their own. Even though Roman Wilson went out early and like that's why they didn't really pass it too much throughout the rest of that game, Blake Corum didn't, run rampant. Yes, he had 2 touchdowns. His longest rush was 14 yards, 28 carries for 94 yards. I would take that as Brian Williams, the defensive coordinator for Maryland. If you could guarantee he has less than 100 yards on damn near 30 carries, any team in the country would take that. Like, that's great. And Donovan Edwards had 11 for 39, so he didn't get it going either. And it was just so frustrating to see Maryland not take advantage of opportunities. The defense came through. They did. Because it was 2 safeties, or one was a fumble recovery touchdown and a safety. That's not on the defense. If you take those 9 points away, they gave up 22 points. Maryland wins this game. So the defense played phenomenal. I was a little worried about Michigan, to be honest with you. I was kind of shocked. They kind of were flat. I mean, granted, Roman wasn't going out, it's huge. They looked flat. They didn't look like themselves. The offensive line didn't look like themselves. The defensive line, thank God they showed up, because that was pretty much what kept Michigan in the game, in my opinion, was the big plays made by the front four. If you talk about the safety and the second interception Talia threw when he just went deep, it's because they got to Talia. They got in his face. So I'm a little worried about Michigan going into this week. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I'm not saying that to like ruffle your feathers, piss you off. Ohio State looks as good as they have all year, man. Like, they look like a well-oiled machine. And the line of scrimmage is only going to be harder to win against that Ohio State team.
It'll come down. The offensive line in pass protection has struggled. Granted, they were hurt, and it is expected, as I think Sharon Moore reported on Monday in his press conference. Ladarius Henderson, who went out early in that game, their left tackle, he'll be back. And then Miles Hinton, his backup depth piece, he'll be back as well. They had actually moved Trente Jones to right, and then Carson Barnhart, who really struggled in that game versus Penn State, on the right side. He had to move to left tackle, and that was over in a second. He can't play left tackle. So they're going to be healthy, depending on the left side, how healthy. And then on the right side, can Carson Barnhart hold his own against JT Tumalau? That will be the question. But in that game, that offensive line really, really struggled. And they did, you keep hating on Talia. He made some big throws. He made those throws down the sideline.
The one to Caden Prather was big. I will give
unbelievable.
Credit. That was a huge play. That was a huge play. My thing with him is the consistency, because that's what he's known for. But then when he plays the bigger teams, we saw it against Ohio State. He would make spurt plays. The opening drive to Caden Prather, again, to take the lead against Ohio State. We were tied late in that third quarter against Ohio State, and then he just kept on making mental mistakes. The last drive of that first half, when he literally just threw a check down, clock ticking, didn't get a ball out of bounds, and then the clock reaches 0. That play, that could have been a potential opportunity for a field goal to take the lead against Ohio State. And in this one, if you have McCarthy for 12 for 23, 141 yards and a pick, Blake Corum doesn't rush for 100 yards. What offensive coordinator in the country would not take advantage of that, right? Anyone would pay to have that type of game if you're playing Michigan. Those are the games you have to take advantage of if you're Talia. You can't finish with sub 250 passing yards, no TDs, and 2 picks. You can't.
You can't.
You can't.
Look, it was hard fought, especially in that second half. Maryland gave Michigan their all in that sandwich spot. And look, it was close. It was ugly. It wasn't fun to watch that in person, but a win is a win. And that's, I think, the sentiment around Michigan right now.
That's fair. I mean, look, a win's a win. When you don't play well and you still win, you take that. You take that all day.
You take it. All right, let's move into it. The game. Before I just want to look at these schedules because it just hit me. If Ohio State, right? So Michigan, let's say they're coming off in week, I think it was in the middle of the season, they played at Minnesota, at Michigan State back-to-back.
Yes.
Okay. Let's say those were the last 2 games for Michigan. And let's say Ohio State was off those 2 games to Maryland and Penn State, those same 2 games. What is the spread?
I was just about to say, I just saw it in your notes. If Michigan handled Maryland, that's easily above 7 easily. Right.
I don't think it's above. I think it's 6.5.
Whatever you might think it. Right. Okay. But to defend Ohio State, which I haven't done much of this year, to defend them, their beginning of the year schedule was a lot harder than Michigan's. It was a lot harder. They had to go at Notre Dame. They had some quality wins there. So it does somewhat balance out. They played Penn State earlier in the year as well, right? Granted, it was at home game, but I mean, they can't control that, right? It's just they flip it with Penn State, Ohio State, same way they flip it with the game. It's home one year, away another year. So they've played a tough schedule. Just it happens to be at the beginning of the year. So I think that's why that line is -3.5. But I don't know, man. Like this game is going to be really good because I think first of all, Ohio State's got to be so motivated. Can you imagine going in?
I think both teams, and I hate the motivated question. Both teams are as motivated as you can be. Ohio State off the back-to-back losses, feeling disrespected, sign stealing scandal, whatever they think about that.
Yeah.
And then Michigan, who is feeling, okay, we are disrespected by everyone right now. We've been hated on by all these different sports media people. We're motivated. We're at home. This is us. This is the game. This is the rivalry. They hate each other. Both teams will get up. There's no question about who will get up. And I heard this on Klatt was talking about this on the Collins show on the Herd today. Who's going to be more prepared? Because Michigan, you would say in the past they would have been but there's no Jim Harbaugh. And Ohio State, they've been questionable with being prepared with Ryan Day, but maybe they've taken an increased focus this season. That to me would be the question: who is more prepared?
It's going to be interesting. I think the big thing for Ohio State, we kind of saw it. To Maryland's credit, what was the one thing I said if they wanted their offense to get going? What was the one thing I said they had to do? They had to get Roman Hemby involved. They had to get him 10-plus carries. Even though he didn't have a crazy day, you did see Maryland emphasize the running game early in drives and trying to get on 1st and 10, get 3 or 4 yards. Trevion Henderson is much better than Roman Hemby this year. He's a better running back. He's going to be behind a better, although questionable at times, better offensive line in general. If they can get him going and take pressure off McCord, that's when you got to get a little worried if you're Michigan, because when it comes to the passing game, I don't care who lines up for Michigan. 18 in red is just going to be a problem for about anyone with Marvin Harrison. So that's the key for Ohio State. If they want to stay in this, it's the same as Maryland. You got to get the running game going. You just absolutely have to get it going.
So Michigan, the one thing, and you said at the defensive line, that was their best run defensive game of the season. So that's the one positive is, okay, Mason Graham, Chris Jenkins, Cam Good in the middle, those front four, and then you had McGregor on the left, Harold, you had Josiah Stewart. These guys, and they go 8-9 deep, they played their best game of the season against – I think Maryland had 19 rushing yards. So
the thing, it was a positive. I just think for Maryland, it was so good to see they emphasized the running game because it was like, oh, okay, like this is a pass-first offense, obviously, in Maryland. But they finally, for the love of God, just gave the ball to Roman Hemby. Although he didn't have a great game, to see them actually care about the running game was huge. Meanwhile, Ohio State has a better running game. So if Michigan cannot replicate that same success, dude, Trevion Henderson's just going to have a day if they can't replicate that success. Because one thing I'll say, the offensive line's gotten better for Ohio State. They were not good in the beginning of the year. And then they got better and better and better and better. So it's going to be it's the line of scrimmage battle. That's all it comes down to in this game, right? And then it's based on that. Also, Roman Wilson, like if he's not 100%, or I don't personally know his situation. You probably know more about it, whether he's whatever he was able to do.
It was the hit. It was an undisclosed injury. Apparently, he was laughing on the sidelines for what it's worth. I think they might have gotten a little. They like to do this where they hold guys out and make sure they're ready for Ohio State. Maybe there was a concussion thing because it was a huge hit and you saw it in person. That was a rough hit up into the head neck area. They claim he's good to go and 100%, but who knows? No one knows.
I mean, if Michigan's one-dimensional and Roman Wilson, because basically that's what happened pretty much with Michigan against Maryland once he was out of the game. They became one-dimensional. They literally were like, Blake Corum, take the wheel. And they just prayed to get out. So I don't know if you can get away with that with Ohio State. I don't think.
And JJ missed a wide open throw at the end of the game. He played awful, and he's dealing with an injury as well. His ankle. He said he's feeling better. He was going through some stuff in that Maryland game. Again, injuries we just don't know. But the one thing we do know is that the two keys the last 2 seasons for Michigan. I talked about being prepared. Ohio State has dealt with the penalty issue. against
Yeah.
Michigan. Big time penalties. Over the past two matchups, Ohio State flagged 19 times for 157 yards, Michigan 7 for 50. 6 of those Buckeye penalties, remember that huge headbutt last year
Yeah.
on the sideline, and then you had that Roman Wilson flag on Cam Brown when he pulled the helmet off. Those 2 flags, in addition to 4 others, led to first downs for Michigan. That to me, number one penalties, and then red zone. We talked about it. Michigan, the past couple of years, and especially remember that Kate Stover playing at the back of the end zone when Sanders still ripped it out of his hands. That was the biggest key because they held him to 3. Outside of that first touchdown, there was not a lot of success for CJ Stroud in that offense, scoring touchdowns. This season, the numbers haven't changed. Michigan offense, 75% of their opportunities in the red zone have been converted into touchdowns. Ohio State's offense, 61%. As for penalties, Michigan, the fewest penalties in the country. Ohio State, 65th. Those 2 stats that determine the last 2 matchups are still prevalent and still in the balance towards Michigan. That's a factor.
And by the way, that comes back to the point that you mentioned, who's going to be more prepared. Being more prepared means being more disciplined. And if you're Ryan Day, by the way, he's 1-2 as a head coach against Michigan, right? He won with Justin Fields, got swept with CJ Stroud. I don't think there's going to be a more motivated man on that field besides Ryan Day. He cannot be 1-3 as a head coach of Ohio State against Michigan, because that's just a horrible look. There are college football playoff hopes out the window. And if you lose to an interim head coach, that I don't care what the situation, that's an embarrassing look if you're Ryan Day. That's why I think Ohio State is going to keep this close. I love that line, -3.5. I think Michigan is going to win, but I think it's a 30-27 type of thing. I wouldn't be shocked if Ohio State comes out and wins. I think it's going to be that close. I think it comes down to 1 possession.
All right, let's dive a little bit deeper, and then I'll give my pick at the end. I know you guys are probably thinking of taking, but let's talk about JJ, because, we touched on a little bit. He did not play well. He did not.
No, I didn't.
He looked bad, his ankle. And are you concerned that when, and this came out this week, when Jim Harbaugh has not been on the field in those 5 games, he has played worse? Are you concerned?
The thing I'm concerned about that you've also previously said, when we said, oh, my ankle's banged up, I'm feeling better, but obviously, not 100%. You hear that as the defensive coordinator for Ohio State, it's coming out of the gate, right? The floodgates are going to be open. They're coming after JJ McCarthy. They're going to bring everything they have against JJ McCarthy, especially the Roman Wilson not being 100%. If they really do need to rely on that run game, Ohio State's coming at him heavy with heavy blitz packages at the beginning of the game.
I don't know about that, because they did that last year and that did not work.
Okay, but was last year Roman Wilson not 100%? Was JJ McCarthy not 100%?
It's fair. That's on the road in his first ever start in Ohio State.
It's just, I don't know. I feel like the key here, you got to make JJ go into pressure, because that has truly been the only time that when he's comfortable in the pocket, he's been great. Like you look at, not great teams, obviously, but Indiana and Michigan State in those 2 games combined, 7 TDs, no interceptions. His completion percentage was north of 75% in both of those games. And I'd be willing to bet he didn't get hit a lot in those games, right? I would be willing. Indiana got banged around a little, but Michigan State, not really, right? He got hit 1 time. He got 1 sack on him for Michigan State, but then he plays Penn State. They apply the pressure, and then they realize, oh, okay, well, we'll just hand the ball off. They didn't even let JJ try to win that game for them. It was really just a running attack. What was it, 32 straight runs? I believe it was. So 32 straight runs. And then you could look against Maryland. They didn't have that same success necessarily in the running game, even though Corum had 2 TDs, but under 100 yards rushing, right? Longest carry was 14 yards, and he just did not look good. And maybe that is because of the ankle injury, or maybe something's just going on with him mentally. But if he has those same problems, he carries them in against Ohio State, that's going to be a problem, because this is a great defense.
I think there's 2 things to this. I think you're right about the pressure. I'll start with this. The JJ McCarthy, we've seen too big of a sample size, unless he's actually really, really hurt. But it seems like in that press conference, he was doing better. You can read into the tea leaves all you want. But it seems like off a bad game, against Bowling Green, he responded. And maybe it's Jim Harbaugh not being there, but I feel like for a quarterback like that, with the amount of talent and the amount of sample size games we've seen from him in big moments. He's been in big moments, a
Yes.
lot of big moments, and he's failed in big moments. And he claims he's learned from them. I just don't see him playing the same way he did against Maryland. If he has time, and this is the second part, I tweeted this on Monday. Sack percentage from teams on Michigan's conference schedule. This is interesting. Last 2 games, right, where JJ has faced the pressure, really the last 3. Penn State is second in the country at 12.71%. Purdue is 12th in the country at 8.87%. And Maryland is 8.06%, 22nd in the country. Guess what Ohio State is?
Oh boy. Not good. Not good for you.
Not good for Ohio State. They are 78th
Whoa.
in the country. 78th. That is the 3rd worst on the Michigan's conference schedule.
That's would never have guessed that.
I know they've improved, and I know they have the talent, but they have not been consistent at getting to the quarterback.
Okay.
And we've seen offensive lines, especially in college football, they play better at home, right? Penn State's offensive line versus at home versus Michigan versus Penn State's offensive line on the road against Ohio State. It was 2 completely different things. So is that something that you look at and say, they've already faced the bulk pressure against Penn State, Maryland, Purdue, last 3 games. Now you face Ohio State, who's kind of struggled in that department.
That's interesting. That is an interesting stat. I will say, though, it is a little like the offensive line, they do have to still come ready. Because as you mentioned.
Of course.
No, that's a great stat. If they can prevent McCarthy from getting hit, then I think they can win this game, obviously, of course. But if he gets hit, let's say hypothetically that ankle gets wrapped up in a bad tackle or something, then you do become a little worried, right? So we'll see. I mean, I just told you what I think. I think they're overall right now the better team. I just think this is going to be a 1-possession game because I think Ohio State's playing their best football of the season. So I don't know, man. I mean, this is a coin flip. I could go either way.
All right. Can I give you one more? Can I give you about Kyle McCord? So Kyle McCord, who has been up and down, a lot of people. Yeah, go.
Sorry, that's the reason I don't think Michigan's going to win. Continue.
Yeah. So Kyle McCord, he's been efficient. He's been better of late, I believe, obviously against worse competition. But his stats, and this was kind of like CJ Stroud in that first year at home or on the road against Michigan. This was kind of the same numbers that we saw. McCord goes from 5th in passer rating to 110th under pressure. He goes from 72.7% completion to 38% under pressure. Michigan, according to PFF, is 4th ranked nationally in pass rushing. Their blockers, here we go. Josiah Stewart, 3rd in getting by their blocker. Jalen Howell, 8th. Yep. Derek Moore, 20th. Braden McGregor, 32nd. That's 5. No, that's 4 in the top 32 in pass rush win rate.
Dang.
There is a world where Michigan, this is what the stats are telling me, and of course, Ohio State has seen a boost in the past couple of weeks. Michigan will be able to block Ohio State, according to the numbers. Ohio State will not be able to block Michigan. That's what the numbers are saying.
It's a fair point. The reason I don't think Ohio State will pull away in the end is because you're right. You know me. I've never been a Kyle McCord fan because even when he does have a clean pocket, there's just still issues. Like he still sees ghosts. And I can definitely see a scenario where Ohio State keeps it close and he makes a dumb play at the end. It's the script. If I were to write a script, it would be that. So I don't know. I mean, I can never say in the game that it's going to be a blowout either way. Especially this year. I think this is the most intriguing matchup with all the outside extracurriculars too. So we'll see. But I mean, the numbers support Michigan. They really do.
The numbers support Michigan, but of course the wild card is Jim Harbaugh. He is not there, and I think that's a big loss, especially if JJ gets off to a rough start against the number 1 passing defense in the country.
Yeah.
I think that affects Michigan early. I think he kind of maybe struggles maybe early. Ohio State comes out strong. Michigan, it's close in that first half, as we've seen in the past 2 years. But I just go back to those stats, the line of scrimmage. Michigan, if they can protect JJ and the numbers support that they can, and again, they've gotten better. JT has shown up in big spots. He is probably a mid to late first round pick. Jack Sawyer mid to late first round pick. If they get going, this completely changes the game. But if Michigan can protect JJ McCarthy and they can get pressure on Kyle McCord, and it's a lower scoring game, lower possession game, I don't see how Michigan loses. They're too balanced if he's protected because they can run the ball and they can throw it. If Kyle McCord is under pressure for multiple series of this game, he's not going to be able to throw as the numbers back up.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does come down. Like I said, it's the line of scrimmage is everything in this game. If McCarthy has a clean pocket and he can just, even if it's just check down, if he just wins the time of possession battle, it's kind of similar. We talked about, obviously, different scenario. We talked about it, but with Florida State, their only way is Florida State's, they just got to keep the time of possession in their favor. I think if Michigan can just keep the ball out of the hands of Ohio State's offense and not let Marvin make big plays, not let Henderson get it going, that to me is the big thing. They just got it's time possession and line of scrimmage. If Michigan can win both of those, I see them winning this game. I think those are huge factors.
That's completely fair. I got Michigan. I'll go 27-17. I think they pull away in the second half a little bit.
I'm going to go, I said 30-27 originally, but I won't lie, your stats are pretty damn good. I'm going to go.
You got to take into account that this is full season. They've gotten much better, granted against weaker competition, and they have their coach. Michigan doesn't. There's a lot of factors, especially with the penalty stuff. Who knows what Jerome Moore is going to be able to do? I think that's the wild card as well.
I'm going to go 34-27 final.
It's higher scoring.
Oh, I think it'll be higher. I don't like the lower. I don't like the lower in this. Also, I mean, talking about history, past 2 years, I mean, it really,
that's the big thing. Yeah.
Right? Like you can't just assume just because they're two like good teams, they're both good against the run, whatever. Like you got it. Like this game has been a shootout in years past. I mean, what did Michigan put up last year? I think it was like 45 or something on the road.
45, 45-20. The last 2 years in these games, it's been 68 points and 67 points.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be. I feel the same thing coming because I think there's so many weapons offensively for both teams, especially if the offensive lines can hold up. So I'm going to go 34-27.
34-27. I got 27-17.
Yeah,
Michigan. I wish you picked Ohio State.
Here's the thing. I think Ohio State. I think a lot of people are not respecting Ohio State in this game. Like, I think this is going to be. Some people are going to say, "Oh, Michigan's going to kill them." Like all.
I haven't heard that. I've heard that this is. Ohio State's rising, Michigan's falling after that game versus Maryland. Ohio State, they're motivated. I've heard that.
It just doesn't make sense to me to say that it's going to be steamboat for Michigan. I think it's going to be such a close. I think this is going to be the best game in this rivalry in the past 2 years. I personally believe.
You can go back even farther since 2016.
Yeah, since the JT Barrett game, which you guys, I will say, you guys got so screwed on that, dude. Oh my God.
We don't talk about that. That was
such a bad call. But one last thing on this game. I was thinking about this when you're talking about the stats and you're talking about Coach Moore, the interim. Is this an audition for him?
Has to be.
It has to be, right? There's so many vacancies out there and so many coaches that are going to be moving around, even the not so highlighted jobs. There's an opening at Mississippi State, which is an SEC school. They would call Coach Moore if Michigan can dominate and they make a deep run and, who knows? They win the national championship, right? Or even if, let's say, this is Harbaugh's last year. Like, hypothetically, what if Coach Harbaugh goes to the NFL or they don't bring him back?
He's the guy. Then it would be more.
He's the guy. So I think this is a huge game for him because this is definitely an audition game, in my opinion.
Would A&M look at him?
Consider, maybe. Would Florida? Would UCLA?
Florida, UCLA. I don't
think they want to be.
I didn't think he'd go. You got to have he's an identity type of guy. He wants to run the ball. That's what he likes to do. I would say I would look at A&M or Florida if that's really on the table. Those teams, they don't want to throw it around as much as maybe other teams do. Yeah. And yes, they're kind of transitioning, but if Sharon Moore can really show success on this big of a stage in this big of a game, you have to, as a big school, look at him as a potential coach.
Why not?
No bias,
right? No, truly. Like, he's answered the bell. Like, he has been great in his time. Like, you look at the players, they love him. After every, Blake Corum has basically preached the gospel after every game with this guy, right? So I think this is I think it's an audition game. I love chaos, so I would love for there to be some leak about schools being interested in him. But if he keeps doing what he's doing, man, like, why not? Why not give him a chance?
Why not? All right. Michigan, Ohio State. We've got Florida State, Oregon, Oregon State. Those are the three big ones. We got the
Yeah.
Iron Bowl. We got a bunch of other stuff to watch on Rivalry Weekend. We got the Egg Bowl. The Egg Bowl tomorrow night.
Hello. Hey, Mississippi
Hello.
State. They need a guy. They need a guy. Call Moore, Coach Moore, man.
Cool. All right, we'll end it there. Michigan, Ohio State. I'll be there. It'll be tough. It'll be gritty. We'll have coverage after the game, and of course, get prepared for next week because we already know we've got Alabama, Georgia. We're gonna have the winner of Michigan, Ohio State playing Iowa. We're gonna have Texas most likely. I think they're clinched, right?
They should. Yeah, they should be because this is the final week of the season. Yeah.
So Texas plays whoever. Maybe it's Oklahoma. I don't even know who it is at this point. I think Oklahoma State with the win. And then, of course, your Pac-12, the winner. If Washington can win and Oregon can win this week at home versus Oregon State, we would have Washington, Oregon, basically two de facto potential playoff games. Be fun next week.
By the way, how disappointing would it be if like Oregon lost this week? Like for as far as just like the oh my God, can you imagine if Washington lost, it would just be like, oh, like that is my biggest worry.
I don't see it. We just broke that. I don't see it. Do you?
I don't see it either, but I mean, that would just
you never know.
I would be so sad, dude, if one of those teams lost. Like, I can't wait though. I can't wait.
All right. We'll talk next week. So that is the one reaction with Levy. Just breaking down college football week 12. We'll be back next week.